The news first on BBC One with George Alagai in Jerusalem and Peter Sissons in London. It's 9 o'clock.
On the edge of war, Israelis and Palestinians gripped in a cycle of violence. One-time partners in the search for peace now shoot it out on the streets. The negotiators fight to be heard over the sound of bullets and accusations.
Here, the southeast floods spread their misery and are costing millions. Hundreds are still homeless and flood warnings are still in force. And Scotland's Parliament united in tribute and grief for Donald Dewar.
Good evening from Jerusalem, where Israel and the Palestinians today stand on the brink of war. International diplomats have shuttled between the two sides, trying to arrange a peace summit. But here in Israel and in the Palestinian West Bank and Gaza, there's been a series of clashes between Israeli soldiers and Arab demonstrators. One Palestinian was killed and dozens were injured. But the two sides have, so far, avoided an escalation of yesterday's conflict. And the funeral has taken place of one of the Israeli soldiers brutally murdered yesterday by a Palestinian mob. First, our special correspondent, Ben Brown, reports on yet another day of anger and bloodshed.
Today they buried one of the Israeli soldiers who was beaten and stabbed to death by a mob of young Palestinians and whose murder triggered a wave of Israeli reprisals. Vadim Novosher was aged 33. He married his sweetheart only last week. She's expecting his baby. Yesterday she called the police station where he was held. A Palestinian answered the phone and said, "We've just killed your husband." In Ramallah, Palestinians have been marching past the police station where the two soldiers died such horrific deaths. It's now been reduced to a pile of rubble by Israeli helicopter gunships. But these Palestinians show no signs of remorse. Instead, they chant Islamic revolutionary slogans and protest about the Israeli attacks on their town. But they were not content with just a peaceful demonstration. More violence was predictable, maybe even inevitable, after yesterday's Israeli onslaught. Riots quickly escalated into exchanges of live gunfire. Machine guns on these Israeli tanks opened up on Palestinian positions nearby, where the Israelis said they were being shot at. Bullets ricocheted around the rocks. Later we saw the Israelis bringing in extra tanks on low loaders to reinforce their positions here on the West Bank.
So another display of extremely tough tactics by the Israeli security forces here in Ramallah. They are on the highest state of alert. Extra troops have been drafted in and leave has been cancelled.
And Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus, also echoed to the sound of gunfire. Our camera crew trapped inside this Israeli army base. But what Israel security forces really fear now is a new wave of terrorist bombings by Palestinian extremists.
There's been persistent reports about the green light that Yasser Arafat and the PA has given to the conduct of large-scale terrorist attacks, including car bombs and mass suicide attacks and so forth that we have already experienced in the past.
The security forces are cracking down hard. In Jerusalem today, they prevented Palestinians under the age of 45 from getting into the old city. They feared a riot after Friday prayers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So instead, the young Palestinians prayed outside in the street, under the eyes of the Israeli security forces they so detest. They were seething with anger.
Do you think there can be peace now?
Never, never, never. Everybody lost a brother, the sister, the mother, the father. Everybody lost. How can it be peace?
Temperatures were running high. Not surprisingly, because at the very heart of this crisis is the future status of Jerusalem. It wasn't long before yet more vicious clashes had erupted inside and outside the walls of the old city. There were running battles through the streets. Israeli undercover units made plenty of arrests. These officers, who never want to be identified, pretend to be Palestinians during a riot, but when they spot a suspect, they treat them with little mercy. The security forces tried again and again to stop us filming here. This Palestinian lay badly injured on the ground. His friends attempted to rescue him, but the furious undercover officers raced to drag him back down onto the street. This was just one incident today, but an example of how far this crisis has escalated and how far hopes of peace have receded. In Hebron too, there have been more clashes and more casualties. Violence is still exploding in many towns and cities here, and 2 weeks into this Palestinian uprising, there's still no end in sight. Ben Brown, BBC News on the West Bank.
Intense negotiations are underway both here in Israel and around the world to try to agree terms for holding a peace summit. It could happen in Egypt as early as this weekend. The United Nations Secretary-General Kofi Annan and the British Foreign Secretary Robin Cook have spent the day shuttling between the Israeli and Palestinian leaders. James Robbins was given exclusive access to Robin Cook's efforts to salvage peace.
The RAF VC-10, which is the workhorse of Britain's shuttle diplomacy, was rerouted back to Israel as soon as the government decided Robin Cook should rejoin international efforts to pull the two sides back from the brink. And so in the early hours this morning, the Foreign Secretary headed straight out to Gaza to find the Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat denouncing Israel's helicopter missile attacks very close by.
And I came straight to see Chairman Arafat to show our solidarity and our concern and our commitment to trying to find a way to end the violence.
That's the imperative for all the diplomacy, because it's the most sickening violence of the past fortnight, which has fed a desire for revenge on both sides. First, the overwhelming image was of a terrified 12-year-old Palestinian boy moments before he was shot by Israeli forces. Then it was yesterday's Palestinian lynch mob and the hatred of young men stamping and beating the life out of Israeli soldiers. And throughout the day, Robin Cook has found both sides resisting pressure for an immediate summit with President Clinton. Israel's government is politically weak and doesn't want to risk talks which might fail.
The problem is if it is going to end with positive results or become a fiasco. And I think that the peace process cannot take another fiasco.
Faced with that, as we headed on in yet another motorcade, Robin Cook shared with me some of his feelings, determined optimism, but also frustration.
Events are taking on a momentum that it is difficult for leaders to control. I do think that there is hope that the two sides can come together this weekend, and I've been urging both sides that they should respond positively to the invitation from President Mubarak and from President Clinton. There is a realization, I think, that just how close to the abyss we are, and therefore a recognition that we have to step back. Perhaps the horrific events of the last 24 hours have had the capacity for shock, and that's not necessarily unhelpful if it has awoken people to just how severe the situation is and how urgent it is we find a way out of it.
But tonight, as Robin Cook headed back to Europe, no one is clear if a summit can be convened quickly. Without it, the risk remains of violence spreading throughout the Arab world. James Robbins, BBC News, Jerusalem.
The world has been shocked by the number of Palestinian children killed and injured in the last 2 weeks of fighting. At least 26 of the 100 or so people killed were children. The Palestinians claim the Israeli army is deliberately shooting to kill. The Israelis say that the Palestinians are using children to win the world's sympathy. Hilary Anderson reports on the young victims of the conflict.
These may be the last minutes of this man's life. A bullet is lodged in his head. He was shot like hundreds of Palestinians during the riots. For his wife, it was all too much. Scenes like this are feeding Palestinian anger.
Khalid Bazian, 15 years, a live bullet in the head. Iyad Muhammad, live bullet in the chest.
And a quarter of those killed have been children. Doctors here believe the shots were carefully aimed at the upper body to kill.
They are being shot by the Israelis because they got the live bullets in their heads, in their chest, or even in the upper limbs.
Mohammed Anjoub is 12 years old. He was hit in the back of his head by a rubber-coated bullet a week ago. His mother says she's here to watch him die. Mohammed was shot during protests near Jerusalem's holy sites last Friday, where his mother says he'd gone to pray. Today, like most days, Palestinian children joined the protests. The adults say it's their struggle too. It's a controversial and unequal pairing up of forces. The Palestinians over there, many of whom are children, are taking their lives into their hands, braving the much stronger army. The Israeli soldiers right now are firing rubber-coated bullets in their direction, and not far off, tanks are at the ready. Today in Jerusalem, these boys were championed by the crowds. Here, they learn young. The Israelis blame the Palestinians for the deaths, saying children are used and sent to the front line.
No one should be so naive to believe that something like this happens only because innocent children were moving to school and something terrible happened to them on the way. It is a brutal and cynical way of using the image that the more casualties you have, the more you are right.
But Mohammed wasn't sent to the protest by anyone. He's never been at a rally in his life, his mother told me. He wasn't the type. Another Palestinian boy this week was shot with a satchel on his back. Mohammed may not last the night, his doctor says, and even if he lives, he'll be paralyzed for life and brain damaged at best. Hilary Anderson, BBC News, Jerusalem.
The crisis between the Israelis and the Palestinians is being felt across the region and beyond. America is mourning the death of 17 sailors killed in the suicide bomb attack on the warship USS Cole in Yemen. An Islamic group calling itself Mohammed's Army has claimed responsibility. The group also says it threw a bomb into the British embassy in Yemen. No one was injured. Our correspondent David Shukman reports now on the conflict's wider impact.
Right across the Muslim world, there's a wave of support for the Palestinians. This was Indonesia today, thousands protesting against Israel and its ally America. They call for jihad, holy war, which is why concern is now mounting about what this conflict could mean for all of us. In Lebanon, Palestinians took to the streets with their weapons. There's talk of war, but these guns would be no match for Israel's high-tech forces, and conventional warfare is unlikely. Instead, these scenes could well inspire an unconventional war, using oil and terror. Tonight, the American Navy was mourning its losses in a terrorist bombing. As many as 17 sailors may have died on their warship in Yemen yesterday. The sense of threat has forced American embassies in the region to close for at least the next 3 days. The USS Cole is now stranded in the Yemeni port of Aden, listing its bomb damage covered by a flimsy tarpaulin. The US Navy's latest generation destroyer humbled by a rubber dinghy packed with explosives. It'll now have to limp home.
We have pumps that are getting the water off the ship, clearing out those damaged spaces, and we're in hopes that we can make the ship seaworthy enough to take it into a port where we can do some minimal repairs to the vessel there before towing it back to the United States.
The British embassy in Yemen came under attack as well. A bomb was thrown into the compound. No one was injured, but these are nervous times. Oil traders are most nervous of all. There's no threat so far to oil supplies. Even so, prices haven't been this high since the Gulf War.
There's no interlink whatsoever between the troubles we're seeing in Lebanon and Israel right now and the flow of oil. But occasionally, with that familiar loose thinking you have in markets, it worries that maybe OPEC might use an oil weapon.
The oil weapon was used to devastating effect in 1973. Arab producers stopped selling oil to any country supporting Israel.
I can only give you 1 gallon, sir.
Britain was among those countries crippled by fuel shortages, and the same could happen again now. American Marines in Yemen are on high alert. The Western world is on its guard. The conflict between Israel and the Palestinians has the capacity to affect us all. David Shukman, BBC News.
With me now is Mr. Nachman Shai, who is the spokesman for the Israeli government. Thank you for joining us. Now, Mr. Kofi Annan has said that he thinks this peace summit is quite likely. Is that a view shared by the Israeli government?
We will come to the summit, but it hasn't been scheduled yet. So we're waiting to hear from the Palestinians to see whether there is a good reason to come. But we are ready, yes.
Now, over the last few days, the Israeli government has said that Mr. Arafat has become an unreliable partner in the peace process. If you still believe that, what is the point of going along to a peace summit?
Because we believe in peace. Because we would like to exercise every attempt possible to achieve peace in the Middle East, with Arafat, with anyone else. If Arafat refuses, there will be someone else.
But you clearly have no faith in Mr. Arafat.
Not very much these days, but we would like to inquire every possibility for peace. So if there is a peace summit, if there's an international call, welcome.
Now, we've just had a report on the number of children that have been killed during these last 2 weeks. Do you accept that what the world sees is a very powerful army using gunships against people on the ground?
That's a television image. The situation in the field is a little bit different. Our forces in many cases are being attacked, and they are ordered. They've been given a permission to shoot only when there is a risk for their own lives. Unfortunately, Arafat sends his own kids, others' kids, to the field to fight against our troops. This is unacceptable.
You're saying
situation.
He does that purposely?
No doubt about it. He uses them. He abused the young generation of the Palestinians to fight against the Israelis, and that's the outcome.
Mr. Arafat and the Palestinians generally say you have an undeclared war going on at the moment. What do you call it?
Well, I call it an emergency situation. There's an emergency situation that we would like to be solved as soon as possible. We started years ago a long peace process, and we would like, as soon as possible, to reach an agreement with the Palestinians and to move to an overall peace for the Middle East.
Mr. Nachman Shai, thank you very much. Peter, that's it from us for the moment. Over to you.
Thank you, George. Here, a second day of flooding in Kent and Sussex has left hundreds of people homeless and caused damage estimated at more than £1 billion. The Environment Agency warned that it could take a week before the affected areas return to normal. 17 severe flood warnings are in force on 13 rivers across East Sussex and Kent. In Lewes, hundreds were forced to spend the night in temporary shelters. Today, the Medway burst its banks, flooding the village of Yalding. In Maidstone and Tunbridge, the same river is still running at dangerously high levels. From there, Nicholas Witchell reports.
Maidstone, one of the major towns of Kent, and a sight the town has not witnessed for more than 30 years. The River Medway swelled to bursting point with water from 3 other rivers and about to break its banks. Sandbags were being prepared, and bank officials left their computer screens and started building makeshift barricades. An RAF helicopter was brought in and the winchman lowered to loosen the moorings on barges which were in danger of being submerged. A few miles away, the village of Yalding was underwater. Local people had been warned to expect 2 feet, but the floods came suddenly and to a much greater depth. Rescue workers went as far as they could on foot, moving along rope lines to prevent themselves being swept away. Others went into the village by boat. Houses had to be left behind and possessions abandoned, as scores of vulnerable people were brought from their homes by fire and ambulance crews and taken to safety.
There we are.
Okay, down you go.
Clean seat.
Look at that.
But as inflatable boats shuttled some people out of the village, others were surveying the damage.
This was the dining room.
And deciding to stay where they were.
Previous years, the police have never ever stopped anybody coming backwards and forwards, so I'd rather be here because it's my home.
Some stood in sodden homes and managed to be philosophical about it all.
it happens, you've got to come back and fight and clean it up and try and do it. It was a bad summer for us. Now it looks like it's going to be a very bad winter.
But others were angry and demanding that more be done to prevent such flooding.
We've completely lost everything. But somebody has got to do something about this. There's got to be, there's got to be some kind of precaution they can take to do something about this sort of flooding, because it can't happen. It's happened 3 times this year.
But flood prevention, says the Environment Agency, is no easy matter.
Sometimes it isn't possible to put some engineering solutions in place, and the only solution, I'm afraid, is to work in the way that we do. Just the flows of water are just too great to handle.
Across parts of East Sussex, where the floods were at their height yesterday, water levels have stabilised. Though tens of thousands of acres are still submerged, much of it farmland, but also factories, businesses and homes. In some places there is the risk of pollution, and everywhere people are being urged to use great caution in what they eat and drink. On the ground, some people are starting to clear up and reflect on decades of work which now lie in ruins.
I had a nice little business running along quite smoothly, and suddenly, potentially nothing, so it does take it out of you. Yes, it does take it out of you.
One couple, though, had reason to celebrate. Cut off by the floods, Julia Black went into labour. She was brought to hospital by tractor, lifeboat and ambulance. Now there's speculation about what the baby will be called.
Lots of suggestions, and obviously one being Noah, or Nelson.
Tonight in the centre of Maidstone and elsewhere along the path of the River Medway, water levels are still rising. There is still tonight a vast amount of water coming down the River Medway. The situation remains extremely unpredictable. The next critical point for Maidstone will come in the early hours of tomorrow morning, when water levels will again be at their maximum height. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News in Maidstone.
And Robert Hall joins us from Maidstone now. Robert, they must be braced for a really miserable night there tonight.
Yes, they are, Peter, and it really is quite a worrying situation. The Environment Agency have told me in the last few minutes that really this river needed to drop about 5 feet since the high tide at tea time, 4:30 this afternoon. It has, in fact, risen by 3 feet. Now, that is a very bad situation, because when these floodwaters meet the high tide that Nick's just referred to, they'll have nowhere to go except sideways, except to break what flood defences remain. If you look at the flow of water under the bridge here, you can see the volume that is still coming down the River Medway. Despite flood defences further upstream, that volume shows no sign of decreasing, and that is very worrying. The police say that at midnight tonight, they will decide whether further evacuations are needed.
Thankfully, Robert, there's been no loss of life in the southeast. Is that down to luck?
I think it's down to luck and the fact that emergency services have been pushing the message very hard. We've had to move around in the water, and the currents are deceptively strong. You get undercurrents, there is debris under the water, even in relatively shallow water, that can trip you, cause you to lose your footing, and then you can get swept away. One remembers the case of the man in Uckfield yesterday. The lifeboat crews have had a very hard time. 1 or 2 of them have had some very close calls. So yes, I think there's been an amount of luck. I think also people have been heeding the warnings, which are still very much in force, particularly along the Medway and its tributaries. Keep away from the river. Don't treat it lightly.
Robert Hall, thank you. This year's Nobel Peace Prize has been awarded to the president of South Korea, Kim Dae-jung. He was given the prize for his efforts to end decades of conflict between North and South Korea. Kim Dae-jung visited his northern counterpart for the first time in June this year. A man has been shot dead in West Belfast. Joseph O'Connor was sitting in the front of a white car when 2 hooded men walked up and shot him at close range. Mr. O'Connor is believed to have been a member of a dissident Republican group. Members of the Scottish Parliament have been paying tribute to the First Minister, Donald Dewar, who died on Wednesday. A specially convened session began with a minute's silence before the leaders of Scotland's main political parties paid their respects.
Donald Dewar's influence went far beyond the political arena in Scotland, but this was a chance for colleagues, political allies and opponents to mark the passing of a man described as a towering figure. It was a Spartan, sombre occasion, the emotion tangible as the members of the Scottish Parliament rose for a minute's silence. The presiding officer led the speeches, describing Mr Dewar as a man who'd elevated politics, leaving behind the completion of a project to restore Scotland's Parliament after 300 years.
He questioned the title Father of the Nation, but he was, without question, the Father of the Parliament. Under his leadership, this new Parliament had already found its head, its energy, its skills, and today, meeting to mourn his death, it has found its heart.
Today we meet. With Mr Dewar's seat empty, a succession of party leaders for the Lib Dems, the Tories and the Nationalists, and a senior Labour executive minister praised his human qualities of decency, dignity and integrity. It was almost too much for Mr Dewar's former spokesman, who announced the news of his death to the public. This was a sombre occasion, but as Mr Dewar often pointed out himself, politics is a tough business, and the jockeying to succeed him as First Minister will begin in earnest once the funeral has taken place in Glasgow next week. Andrew Castle, BBC News, Edinburgh.
A man who claims to have handed a bunch of flowers containing a marijuana plant to the Queen is to be questioned by the police. Colin Davis says he did it to highlight the campaign to legalise cannabis for medical purposes.
Flowers for a Queen, a not unusual gift on a royal visit, and yesterday was no exception, as the Queen went to look around the Lowry Arts Centre in Salford in Greater Manchester. It was a whistle-stop tour, and as she was leaving, the Queen was handed another posy, this time a wrapped bouquet of green leaves. Only this bouquet was given by a cannabis activist, hoping to highlight the campaign to legalise marijuana. Police now want to question Colin Davis, who claims the plant Her Majesty unwittingly took from him was cannabis. Mr Davis, seen here showing reporters around his medical marijuana cooperative, claims he grew the plant himself. He wants cannabis to be legally available for people who are sick and would benefit from the plant's pain-killing properties. Today, Buckingham Palace said the Queen was unaware of what was in the posy, which had been handed on to an aide to be distributed to either a local hospital or an old people's home. But this is one royal floral gift police will make sure isn't going anywhere. Emma Howard, BBC News.
Back now to the main news and the ongoing attempts to end the violence in the Middle East. George Alagaya is in Jerusalem now.
Thank you, Peter. Now, our special correspondent Ben Brown has been reporting on the last 2 weeks of tension and bloodshed, and he joins me now. Ben, you've watched this very closely, as I've just said. The Israelis point out that they think the Palestinians are simply not serious enough about controlling the violence. What's your view on that?
Well, that's always been the key question throughout these 2 weeks is, can Yasser Arafat control this violence, even if he wants to? And the Israelis were absolutely outraged yesterday after their helicopter gunship attacks. The Palestinian authorities, under Mr Arafat's command, released more than 100 extremist terrorist prisoners who'd been in their jails. Now, the Israelis are terrified that these men who carried out some horrific bombings, bus bombings, in the last few years in Israel, are going to start doing the same again. They're worried that this crisis is going to escalate with a new wave of terrorist attacks.
Now, earlier, Ben, we had James Robbins reporting on the diplomatic efforts being made at the moment. In the end, what is it, do you think, that the outsiders can do in this kind of situation, a situation of near tribal hatred?
It really is tribal hatred. I mean, I've been on the streets in Ramallah, in the West Bank, and here in Jerusalem today, and to be absolutely honest, the hatred I have seen in the eyes of these young Palestinians, people who've had enough, who just feel the peace process has not delivered for them, and who have embarked on what they see as a new intifada. They don't want to stop. They believe they are winning. And some of the rhetoric they were coming out with today, they were talking about getting Saddam Hussein to bomb Israel, Tel Aviv to be bombed by the Iraqis. This was extreme, volatile rhetoric, and it's very hard to see how diplomats and diplomats alone can cool things down now.
Ben Brown, thank you very much. Well, Peter, we should know within the next 48 hours or so, I suppose, whether these two sides are still capable of sitting down together and talking peace. That's it from us in Jerusalem.
Thank you, George. And that is, or rather that was, the 9 o'clock news. From Monday, it's me, or Michael Burke, as usual, but with the BBC 10 o'clock news. Until then, from us all, good night.
Good evening. The latest high tide has passed without causing the predicted havoc in parts of West Kent. There had been fears of further widespread flooding, but as the clear-up operation gets underway, the Environment Agency has warned there may be worse to come.
Well, the news tonight is that the River Medway in Maidstone has burst its banks. A number of roads along the embankment here are completely flooded and traffic's having a real problem. There are also problems in the villages between here and Tunbridge.
We suspect we haven't got a home. The car, anybody's guess whether it's got water to it or not. But unfortunately, you know, we have now lost everything.
Yalding, East Peckham, Collier Street and Laddingford are among the worst affected villages. While some chose or were forced to leave, many more decided to stay.
The skirting boards will have to come out. We've had furniture which has just been standing in water for 24 hours, so that's all going to have to be replaced. It's a mess.
This afternoon, emergency services were called when a pleasure cruiser threatened to break from its moorings on the Medway in Maidstone. Throughout the day, the Army has been on standby in Yalding. An air sea rescue helicopter continues to sweep the area for people who may have been trapped.
Amanda Harper there. Meanwhile, South East Water has announced that one of its treatment plants is out of action, another casualty of the floods. The advice is for people to use water carefully and not to store it unnecessarily. And for round-the-clock information on the floods, tune in to BBC Radio Kent on 96.7 FM or 104.2 FM. They'll be broadcasting throughout the night with regular reports from the Environment Agency. 4 people have been arrested in connection with allegations of fraud involving a contract at the Millennium Dome. The company which runs the attraction spotted an irregularity during an internal audit last month. The country's biggest ever Asian lifestyle exhibition has got underway at Wembley tonight. Thousands of people are expected over the weekend to experience a little bit of the East. Organisers say, whatever your taste, there's something for you. From careers to korma and Bhangra to Bollywood. Here's Gargi Patel.
It's about food, it's about fashion, it's about future opportunities. 160 stands, all to do with Asian culture and lifestyle. In fact, it's so hot that it's cool.
I think it's wonderful. I mean, I feel really warm because they've been so, like, you know, receptive towards us.
We've been here for a long time. And I think on a national level, we need to make a mark. You know, people talk about mainstream success and being in the charts musically and all. That's great, because we come from this country and we should aim for the top of our, regardless of the colour of our skin.
And the Bhangra beat continues throughout the weekend at the Wembley Conference Centre.
Gargi Patel there. That's it. Have a great weekend. Good night.
Good evening to you. Good news for those areas badly affected by the floodwaters. The rain should be held at bay through the weekend, and for the southeast of England it should be a dry weekend. But wet weather further out to the west already on our radar here. This is gradually pushing its way through Northern Ireland and western Scotland. Also a finger of rain through Wales and also down into the southwest of England. I think for Northern Ireland at least it looks like it'll be a fairly wet night to come, with some heavy bursts of rain for a time, and the same also travelling further north across the more western parts of Scotland. Now, further south, some of that rain will reach the western side of Wales, but elsewhere, for central and eastern England, it'll be chilly tonight, but also with some mist and fog patches forming and temperatures down to between 4 and 5 degrees. It's the southeast of England and also East Anglia that'll be worst affected by those fog patches, leading to some tricky driving conditions, especially in the second half of the night. Now, we're looking at some rain coming in throughout Saturday over a good part of eastern Scotland, northern England, through the Midlands, Wales and the West Country. Brightening up for Scotland and Northern Ireland, and here a little bit of sunshine in between a few showers, but hopefully remaining dry right in the far southeast. Now, we are going to see temperatures up at around 13 or 14 degrees, but the wet weather down here will lower those temperatures and also bring a risk of further flooding much further out to the west than we've seen recently. We have a flood watch for some of the rivers in southwest England, Wales and the Midlands, with some further heavy rain expected through the first half of the weekend. There is a number there to find out further details. So these are the weather systems that are bringing the more persistent rain across us. They straddle the United Kingdom around lunchtime tomorrow and remain there for lunchtime on Sunday as well, not quite reaching the far southeast. So Sunday's forecast gives a little bit of dry weather down here, some wet weather but turning much drier through the afternoon across these more central parts. And although there'll be some dry weather across Scotland and Northern Ireland for the first half of the day, there is more wind and rain moving in from the west into Northern Ireland and also the western side of Scotland. Well, that's all from me. Have a good weekend.
New Look on BBC One. Brand new comedy on Monday with the final series of 1 Foot in the Grave. And a new arrival for the new series The Royal Family is back.
Oh, yeah, definitely am.
It's an alien invasion on Tuesday night. Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones star in our big movie, Men in Black.
I make this look good.
New drama for Wednesday nights. Richard E. Grant is back in The Scarlet Pimpernel.
Calm yourself.
On Thursday, a drama double bill.
Why did I ever agree to do this?
With Holby City and Hope and Glory.
This is personal.
Friday is comedy night with the new series of Have I Got News for You?
Is the right answer.
Plus The Vicar of Dibley.
I hope you're satisfied.
I am, rather.
And every weeknight you can now join us for the BBC 10 o'clock news, with twice as much news from where you live.
The New Look, this Monday on BBC One.
Not to be missed, the New Look to weeknights here on BBC One. Now with many apologies, later than billed, Parkinson.